News Show with me, Connor Lennon. Oh, and Lara Quinones. Yes, she's back. Loyal subscribers to the Lid Is On podcast will remember that Lara, my colleague in the news and media division at UN headquarters, co-hosted a daily edition of the show in a very noisy room at the COP26 UN climate conference in Glasgow. People shouting and sitting on the floor eating their lunch outside. It was lots of fun. So we thought we'd do it all over again in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, for COP27, starting on the 6th of November, right through to the, well, hopefully not too bitter end, because it was quite bitter last time, wasn't it?
It was pretty bitter. I mean, it was emotional. It had a lot of good things, but Alok Sharma's, the president of COP26, tears really got to everyone's heart that year.
Yeah, it was quite full on, and well, we're looking forward to doing it all over again. I am anyway.
And hopefully end on a more positive note. And well, as this is the last show of the Lid Is On before we head to Egypt, we wanted to set the scene and give a brief overview of what has been achieved and what has not since the Glasgow Climate Pact. And the best person to help us do that is Selwyn Hart. He's the special advisor of to the Secretary General on Climate Action. Selwyn, tell us, what is the general mood going into COP, given this series of reports that are telling us that we're not doing enough?
Thank you, and I'm really grateful to be here with you. I'll be very blunt. The mood is not great. Since Glasgow, we've been seeing a series of really dire reports, basically all telling us one thing: we're heading in the wrong direction. Every indicator on climate is heading in the wrong direction. Global emissions are at their highest level. The gap between what countries need to do to keep the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement alive and what they're actually doing, unfortunately, that gap remains wide.
So when I saw the headline today, in fact, describing the last 12 months since Glasgow as a wasted year, and yeah, from what you're saying, all the indicators are pretty bad. But do you think anything positive has come out of the last 12 months, or is it just negative?
It is primarily negative. The silver lining, however, is that public awareness on the scale and complexity of the climate crisis has grown. Renewable energy, which is one of the silver bullets for addressing the climate crisis, the cost of renewable energy continues to decline. And we're seeing this mass movement growing across the world in vulnerable countries, but also in rich countries, calling on their governments to prioritize issues related to loss and damage, which is a major priority for the developing world. But the good news is, honestly, that despite the enormity of the challenge of the climate crisis, we know what we need to do: reduce emissions drastically, invest more in renewable energy. We also need to ensure that we have the tools and instruments to protect people and communities who are on the front lines of the climate crisis. We know what to do, and we have the tools, the instruments, the finance to do it. The problem is it's not being directed in the right places.
Well, let's cast our minds back to a year ago. You're from Barbados, which is a small island developing state. You could say it's on the front lines of the climate crisis. So I'd like to take you to take a look at this interview that I did a little earlier with Ilana Seed. She's Palau's ambassador to the UN, and she represented her country in the climate negotiations at COP26. She told me about the atmosphere at the end of the conference when Alok Sharma, the COP president, almost broke down in tears as the final negotiations became increasingly fraught.
At the end there, when he was breaking down, I think we were all really, really tired at that point. It was a long couple of weeks of very intense negotiations. And
some very long days as well.
Long days, and you know, Alok Sharma, he was so active and he was flying around the world trying to build trust and trying to build the relationships that would actually get this over the line. And so having seen him break down, we knew just how much work and energy and passion he put into it. So at that point, I think we were just kind of waiting. It was just kind of like, this is no longer in our hands. We've done everything we needed to do. We've made our interventions. And it's just up to the larger countries who are still kind of at it to figure it out.
Was there a feeling in Palau and other small countries, other small island countries, that you were steamrolled into accepting this compromise document, or were you fine to adopt it?
We didn't have a choice. We were of the opinion that if we did not accept, and if this was another failed COP, that there would be no more COPs. We actually had that conversation that if something fails 5 times, then it means multilateralism doesn't work for this kind of thing. And it's a lot of money for small countries to go to the COP. It was one of these things where if this is a failed COP, then why do we keep continuing to do it? I mean, I think we were just glad that it happened. We're not happy per se because we wanted more ambition. We wanted more of an outcome. However, it was a huge step to say that we're finally working together. There was a body of work that we can all kind of work together to implement, and I think that was a huge step forward.
Selwyn, I was really struck by the emotion there, and the emotions that were swirling around COP26, and also the high stakes, the fact that if there wasn't an outcome, that could have been the last ever COP. Did you get that sense when you were there?
No, Alok Sharma and his team, Archie Young, Alison Campbell, and his fantastic team did an extremely brilliant job in a very difficult and complex political situation. We were emerging from the COVID-19 crisis, which limited the ability of countries to meet to trash out some of these issues ahead of the COP. So a lot of the technical and political heavy lifting was left to Glasgow. And I think they were still able to deliver an outcome that provided us with a very good basis to build on. I've been to a number of COPs. I've been listening along, and I was there in Copenhagen in 2009 when the entire regime collapsed. So in a real sense, I've seen worse. The reality is that the climate crisis is a complex, is an extremely difficult issue to solve, and there are no really easy or simple fixes. Countries are there defending their national interests. There to be some level of disruption. But the good thing about a multilateral process like this is that a country like mine, Barbados, 300,000 people, Palau, a few thousand folks, they have the same voice as a country like China, India, the United States, or the European Union. And that's the beauty of multilateralism, and that's the beauty of the work under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Were it not for the islands, this 1.5 degree goal, which has now become the benchmark for global ambition, would not be in the Paris Agreement. It was the SIDS that put that 1.5 degree goal on the table way back, SIDS being the small island states, way back in 2008. Back then, I was a negotiator. We were isolated. No one supported us. We got the least developed countries on board, and then the African countries and some Latin American countries. But back then, we were isolated. And now 1.5 is the global benchmark for ambition. So it can be frustrating. There can be setbacks. It's not an easy process, it's a complex process. But the fact that it provides the smallest members of the UN family to have a voice and a seat at the table on equal terms allows us to set a level of ambition, or has allowed this process to set a level of ambition that hopefully will not only save them, but will save vulnerable people, marginalized individuals even in the rich countries, right? So frustrating, but there's no substitute for a multilateral process.
And talking about goals, the Egyptian presidency this year, they have said that this COP will be more about implementation than negotiation. So how are all these commitments that they have made in previous COPs and also the Glasgow Climate Pact are going to come into action? Are they going to be turning to action? What do you think? Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, I definitely believe that it's possible. And in our discussions with the Egyptians, we've called it an implementation plus conference. Yes, we need to be credible about what we have committed through this implementation process, but we also need to recognize that even the current commitments are not enough, right? So we want countries to put the policies and measures in place to implement their nationally determined contributions, the NDCs or the national climate plans. But in the most recent report from the UNFCCC on the cumulative impact of these nationally determined contributions, they added all the NDCs together and came up with numbers to determine what that means in terms of the temperature goal. We're still at 2.5 to 2.8 degrees of warming. The NDCs don't bring us down to 1.5.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these reports are pretty terrifying for most people reading the newspaper or looking online who are not in government, just regular people. Must put the fear of God into so many people. And you'd think, wouldn't you, that it would also be a huge wake-up call, finally, for people who do have power to make a difference, to actually do something. So, of course, as you said, it's a very complicated, difficult process. But do you think that finally these figures, these numbers, could actually make people in power wake up and move faster?
They should. In some countries, it's happening. But we need people, right, to put pressure on their political leaders. There is, yes, countries are participating in this international process to make international commitments. But they need to be pressured by their citizens who are on the front lines, who are facing the climate crisis. They need to be pressured to be even more ambitious in terms of what they do on climate. I'm sure that the leader of XX country, he or she needs to will respond better to their people than pressure coming from the president of Palau or from the prime minister of Barbados. So we hope that individuals across the world who see these numbers, but also see the impacts, the climate impacts that are happening in their own countries, that are happening across the world, that there will be this mass movement to ensure that climate is on the ballot in every election, that every leader is held accountable for the commitments that they make on climate, that every business leader, every financial institution is held accountable for what they do, not what they say, but what they do on climate. That every international organization, every international financial organization, including the multilateral development banks, that they are held accountable for what they do and not what they say on climate.
Besides all these challenges that we are talking about, this year we had a very special moment at the General Assembly. It was when the majority of countries of the world voted in favor of a resolution that made the right to live in a healthy environment an official, universal, recognized human right. This resolution and this vote also established the offices of a new special rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change, the first one. His name is Ian Fry. He's from Tuvalu, and he recently delivered his first report to the UN General Assembly. I spoke to him afterwards, and he told me what the priorities are, or at least should be, for COP27. Let's listen.
I'm looking at the issues around improving action on mitigation to get countries to commit to more action. We know that there's not enough being done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so I want to sort of bring attention to that and look at the sort of human rights implications of not doing enough on climate change. The next issue is the sort of consequence of that, and I'm looking at the issue of loss and damage, the huge impacts that countries are suffering as a consequence of climate change and the huge costs that are involved with that. And To date, there've been discussions around establishing a loss and damage fund, but that's been moving very slowly. So I'm hoping to build further momentum to work on, getting a loss and damage fund, agreed and up and running.
Why do we need a specific rapporteur on climate change and human rights? What is the special connection between those two?
The crucial issue, and we're seeing it more and more every day, if we think about the floods in Nigeria and Pakistan, the severe drought that's occurring in Somalia at the moment, people's human rights are being affected as a consequence of climate change. And these are millions of people around the world whose basic enjoyment of human rights are being affected by climate change. We have to make that connection. We have to put a human face to the climate change.
Ian Fry, the special rapporteur, he's from Tuvalu, and like Ambassador said, he shares your connection with the small islands. You all have touched on this loss and damage issue. How important is this issue for the small development?
I've known Ian for a very long time, and he's always been a very strong and a very principled voice on all of these issues, and the Secretary General has made it clear. Addressing this massive financing gap in loss and damage, it must be the litmus test for COP27. He has made it clear that this represents a litmus test for success at the COP. Why? Because impacts are getting worse. We know the inequalities associated with climate change. Countries are not doing enough to reduce emissions. So we know that these impacts will only get worse over time. So now is the moment for us to look at how we can provide the necessary finance that is absolutely needed to save lives and to protect livelihoods, because losses and damage from climate change they are intensifying. After the Secretary General came back from Pakistan, where he saw the abject devastation as a result of the flooding, which was exacerbated and caused primarily from climate, he said we have to do all that we can to prioritize and support vulnerable countries on this issue, because this is just going to get worse. And what he saw, where a third of the country, the size of Portugal, 33 million persons displaced, he has really been championing this issue, and he will continue to do it, because it is essentially about saving lives and protecting livelihoods.
And climate justice.
Yes, it is a climate justice issue.
Well, Selwyn, we would love to talk to you for longer, but I know we have to let you go soon. So we'll just wrap up with a brief explanation of what we can expect in the coming days at COP27. So after the official launch on Sunday, that's the 6th of November, there'll be a 2-day World Leaders Summit, and that's when presidents, prime ministers fly in to give speeches on the crisis. After that, whilst the negotiators are getting to work behind the scenes, we will be into the thematic days. So looking at the first week, we've got finance first, then science, youth, decarbonisation, agriculture, adaptation, loads to get through.
And solutions this year.
We will have solutions coming right at the end, last but not least. And then the whole thing officially comes to a close on Thursday, November the 17th. But as we all know, like last year, things may change. We ended up hanging around a bit longer, didn't we?
Saturday night,
more podcasts until we finally got some kind of a resolution.
Well, Selwyn, when are you arriving at COP?
I'm going to go there a few days ahead of the start of the COP and a few days ahead of the Secretary General to get a sense of where countries are, to support my colleague Simon, the new executive secretary, Simon Steele, and the Egyptians as well. They have a good team in place supporting Minister Shukri. And really, it's all hands on deck. We really need to show some support and solidarity and give people a sense of hope.
So really a high stakes 2 weeks ahead, Selwyn. Well, I think it's time for all of us to get going. We all have to start packing and preparing for the next 2
But
weeks.
thank you so much for being here
Really
with us.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I look forward to probably talking to you in Sharm as well.
You have an open invitation to come and see us anytime. We'd love to have you back on. But for now, I think we all need to get packing and prepare for the next 2 weeks. If you haven't already, do please like and subscribe to The Lid Is On. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms. And we'll also be doing a couple more video versions of The Lid Is On.
Podcast.
Oh, vodcast, yes. Your new word of the day. That's right. So don't miss any of the daily episodes. They are all coming to you from Sharm el Sheikh. There'll be lots to talk about. So we look forward to seeing you next week. That's it from me, Connor Lennon.
And Laura Quiñones.